Misty, how you doing today?
Good, how are you?
We're down here at the south side of Barton Springs. You've been here before?
I have.
Well, I want you to think about something. 175 years ago when Billy Barton was here, who was one of the first settlers, none of this would have been here.
Wow.
This would have looked very different. This was out in the middle of the wilderness. Everything that you see here has actually only been here since about the 1920s.
Really?
So get on down here, and I want to take you on up this way and show you the reason the Springs of Bartons are where they are. Okay, so where we're standing now, we're kind of in a gully, right? Mm-hmm. Well, this gully actually extends quite a distance right up there. And this whole gully is evidence of something that happened 60 million years ago.
This gully?
This gully. Because what you're seeing is the evidence of the land folding. And 60 million years ago when that happened, that created all the rock formations and brought them to the surface so the water could travel underneath the ground and come out at what we now know as Barton Springs.
Wow.
So where the really dense rock is, the water flows over that rock. When it gets to the rock where it's porous, it flows underground, and it's that rock formation that is the Edwards Formation that the water's channeling through. That water is actually rainwater. So I want to take you on down to the main springs now, and we'll show you some interesting things down there.
Awesome.
All right. We're down at the main spring now. This is what most people think of when they think of Barton Springs, is this area right here. But look out in the water. What do you see there?
Just looks like natural rock.
Exactly. How do you think the water gets here?
Well, doesn't the water come from under the ground?
Exactly, and it's through those cracks that it comes out. Right now, with the dams here, all the water's been backed up to make a nice swimming area. But if the dam wasn't here, you would see that there is a big drop-off there, and there are cracks that come all through here with water pouring out of it. This is sometimes called Parthenium Springs. It's one of the 4 springs that actually makes up Barton Springs, but it's the only spring that feeds the pool.
So all the water in this spring comes from this rock right here?
Exactly.
Wow.
So that's a lot of water. Parthenium Springs was named Parthenia after Billy Barton's daughter, Parthenia. I kind of like that name, Parthenia. It has a nice ring to it. It's royal enough for this spring. This really is considered the heart of Austin. But there are springs all over Austin, and it's because of those springs that fresh water supply was inviting to folks to settle. I want to go on down to another spring down here called Old Mill Spring or Sunken Garden, because this doesn't tell the whole story. Let's go take a look and see what else we can find out.
Cool.
Now, why do you think it's called Old Mill Spring?
Maybe having something to do with a mill?
Exactly. Because during the 1800s, they didn't just view water for recreation. In fact, they viewed it for bathing more than anything else, not swimming. But they actually used it for power. In fact, we were walking right by the site of one of the biggest mills that was at Barton Spring, called the English and English Mill. It sat right in this area right here. It was in the late 1800s, but burned down about 1885 or so. But the structure, the bottom structure of it, was here up until the 1920s.
So what is this?
This is Barton Creek. All the water from the pool eventually flows into the creek. And down below the dam here, which was built back in the 1920s, people like to come with their dogs especially and play down here.
They still do, obviously.
Yeah. Of course, a walk along the creek any day is a good day. See the water flowing out into the creek here.
Oh, yeah.
I'll show you where that water comes from. Right over this way. Sunken Garden.
Wow.
It's also known as Old Mill Spring because there used to be a mill here, Hadji's Mill. And it was a grist mill, so it ground up corn and grain for flour. Hadji also did other things. He invited people to come swimming down here. He was the first person to actually have a changing area. He also invited people to picnic.
This is really beautiful. Where does the spring water go after it leaves this spring?
Well, if you look, it kind of flows out underneath the wall over there. And it flows down that creek we walked over a few minutes ago. And if you remember, that creek went right into Barton Creek. And Barton Creek feeds into the Colorado River and Lady Bird Lake, and then it goes down to the ocean from there.
Oh, wow. So where did this circular structure come from?
In the 1930s, they decided to turn this into kind of an aquatic garden. And the FDR administration had all these monies available for projects, and this was one of the projects. National Youth Administration. Teenagers and college students were the ones that built this.
Wow.
And what's interesting is the water used to come all the way up to the very top. And people would come swimming down here. They'd picnic down here. There were bands down here. But that changed in the 1990s when this area was set aside as a protected area.
Why did they make it a protected area?
Good question. This is home to the endangered Barton Springs salamander. Barton Springs is the only place where the Barton Springs salamander is found. There's also a second salamander called the Austin blind salamander. They actually have one of the smallest ranges of any vertebrate species, backbone species. During full flow, researchers, biologists, they'll count hundreds of them in this area. It's a very skilled team that does this. We are building this habitat. If something happens to that salamander population, they're gone for good. But I want to take you to another place that's really interesting, and it's called Eliza Springs. And it is where we have a lot of salamanders right now. So where we're walking now, this is an area that hasn't really been disturbed by people too much, except for walking through it. There's not that much construction here.
Yeah, obviously this is the least constructed part of the whole main spring.
Here's that statue I was talking about.
The three philosophers?
Yeah, Philosopher's Rock. That's Bedicek, Dobie, and the guy standing with his back to us is Webb. They were all professors up at UT at one time. But I love this statue because when you look at it, what strikes you about it?
It looks like they've been swimming.
Everybody except for Mr. Webb. He's still in his street clothes. And that's kind of the interesting thing about Barton Springs. We often think of Barton Springs as just a place to go swimming, but it's really a social center for this area. In fact, that is probably the most important thing about Barton Springs from a community standpoint. It's a place people can come together. They'd come and settle the problems of the world sitting on that rock in the middle of the summer. And when Mr. Bedicek got a little too hot, he would dive into his bathtub, as he used to call it. Okay, now let's go over and take a look at this other spring we have over here.
Cool.
This is Eliza Springs. Looks a lot different than the other ones we've been to, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's small.
It's small. What else about it?
It's a circle.
It's a circle.
There's seating.
There's seating. There's a lot of human construction down here. This section you see over here that's kind of filled in, that's where the flow from the spring used to be on the surface down to the pool. So Andrew Zilker built this structure back in 1903 as a meeting place for the Benevolent Order of the Elks. If you look up, you can see a plaque that's dedicated to them. Sitting down here, nice cool shade, you can see why the elks kind of would like to meet down here. And what was interesting is the water was always flowing. This spring was a very powerful spring. In fact, that's one of the reasons the city of Austin now owns this area. Because in 1917, there was a massive drought. There's this picture of a soldier straddling the flow of the Colorado River because the water was so low. At that time, the water supply in Austin was threatened. So Andrew Zilker approached the city and said, I'm going to donate this land to the Austin School District. Why don't you buy it from the school district as a park and also as a water supply? And at the time, they said that's a good idea. So they started working that way, and they started developing plans for actually pumping water from here underneath the river to the city. That never really came to fruition, but what they did do is start thinking of this whole area as a recreation area. And up into the 1950s, people would be able to kind of wander up in here when they visited Barton Springs.
Think it'll ever be a public space again?
No, I don't think so. I think this will be one of those places we set aside so that we can protect the endangered Barton Springs salamander. It is kind of the canary in the coal mine, because if the salamander is surviving in this water, that means the water is of a high enough quality that it won't hurt us to go swimming. The 3 springs we visited, Parthenium Springs, the main spring, and down in the pool. Old Mill Spring, also known as Sunken Gardens. And then this spring, Eliza Spring. Those 3 springs are the 3 main springs that make up the springs at Barton's. There is a 4th spring, it's called Upper Spring, and it's farther up the creek. All these springs together, they make up a system. Not only are they connected together through the geology and hydrology, the water flowing through it, through the biology, the animals that live here, it is also connected through the community that we as humans are all a part of. I hope you had a good time today.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I learned a lot. Very awesome.